In my last video, I went over the basics of Hexagon's interface. If you haven't seen that, you should go back and look for the video titled Exploring Hexagon's Interface. In this video, we'll put to use some of the most common tools used in primitive modeling, and we will build our first model in Hexagon, a low poly model. Ultimately, this will give us the foundation for creating models in a different technique, a technique called box modeling, which will be in the next lesson after this one. I will be using the Hexagon keyboard shortcut guide in this lesson. The key commands I use aren't the default key commands. If you are following along, you need to set up Hexagon in the way that I have it set up. You'll find instructions on that in the description notes below. At the top of this guide, you'll see the primary tools that are used with most modeling projects. In this lesson, we're going to cover modifying selections and moving lines and points to make various shapes. And at the end of this video, I'll give a few advanced modeling tips. In the top corner of the screen, I have the command viewer on. That will show the key commands and the corresponding icons that I use. I won't always call out what key I am using, but I'll try my best to explain what's going on as I construct models. Using those tools, we'll build a model of a low poly jet. Before starting a modeling project, you'll want to have some sort of reference image handy, even if it's only used for inspiration. I like to sketch out what I have in mind as a guide. Even a 3-minute sketch can keep you from going down a time-consuming wrong direction. Okay, let's get started. Let's place a cube in the scene. Press Alt-1. Then look over here, make sure your origin is set to this, the base. Hold Shift, click here, and that will snap to the center of the world. Left click, scale, and left click to place it down. This will become the body of our jet. Okay, the first thing we want to do is divide this in half so that we can make it a symmetrical shape. Press S to go into edge selection mode. Select one edge, then press Alt-R. This makes a ring selection. And now press Shift-X. That splits the ring. Now there are 3 methods in Hexagon for creating symmetrical shapes. 1, manually. 2, using symmetry tools. And then 3, a more advanced way, a combination of using symmetry tools along with cloning and welding methods. We're going to use mostly the manual method in this tutorial and save the other methods for another lesson. Okay, let's shape the sides of our jet. Press D to go to face selection mode. Select this side and rotate around and select the other side. We'll scale this using the manipulator handles. If you don't see this, press Q to activate it. Now click and drag on this handle, and that's scaling our polygons on both sides along the y-plane. So now what we did is very basic, but we can keep doing these few basic actions over and over to build up our overall model, which is what we're going to do now. This shape is too short for our jet body, so select the faces in the front here and then pull the X handle to make the body longer, like this. I want the top of the jet body to look flatter. I select the top line and nudge it down with the handle like this. Then we ring select it and further divide it section by section. Then I select the front and back faces of the body and then scale those and then move it up a bit. Now, unselect these front faces, and let's rotate around and scale this back shape so that it's longer and slimmer, and this will be the tail of the jet. I'll unselect those faces, rotate back to the front, select those faces again, and scale and move to make the nose of the jet. Let's pivot around to see the side, and press 0. And that's snapping to orthographic. This shows us a profile of our shape. Okay, press 0 again to snap out of orthographic. I want to fine-tune this shape so that it curves a bit more. Select this point at the top here. And as I'm doing that, I can look in orthographic mode to see my profile better. I'll do the same with the bottom points here. And I can keep fine-tuning this, selecting points and moving them like this. I'm in orthographic and I know the bottom is a single point, so I can move it without any problem. But back in symmetry, but here you see I select two opposite sides and move them. And this is manual symmetry. If you look over here, I could turn on symmetry mode and select just one point and then move it. And we're going to go over that in another tutorial, but just wanted to show that part of the interface now. I'll press that button again to turn it off. Okay, our jet body looks good. Let's move on to some other parts. Press escape twice to unselect the body. Okay, so now let's make some wings for the jet. Okay, add a cube, pressing Alt 1, and this time we'll change the orientation to center. And so here's the challenge. I already showed you how to add, split, and manipulate the basic cube. I'm going to speed along by making the wings with the same methods. If you are following along, you can watch what I'm doing and make the wings in a similar way. And there, now we have the wings of our jet. You saw me pressing the escape key there a few times. What I was doing was exiting the selection modes to unselect the object and choose another. Here are some other handy key commands. To isolate the visibility of a selection, press Command-Shift-I. Shift-1 is used to select and focus on an object. I also press 1 and that gives me the custom view target. With that, I can choose a point to pivot around, like this. And as I look around, I can change the shading. I can press the up and down arrow to see my object in flat and shaded modes. That will be more important when we get into box modeling. Let's take a break from adding more to the jet and try some of these other key commands in the set. So we used the ring selection quite a bit already, and that's pretty handy, but here you can ring select another line, and ring select again to add to the selection. And that's good if you want to split more than one set at a time. I'll undo that. Or we can also make a combination of loop and ring selections. So to make a loop selection, you press Alt-E. So you first loop select, then ring select. As you make selections this way, you have to watch for areas you didn't want to select and press Shift to unselect. Like here, I made the center line selected. I'll unselect that. Now, in this case, I can't split the loops because the selection is wrapping all the way around. Hexagon would have to make bisecting cuts, and I can't do that in one go. Okay, so I'll forego making any more splits here. When you are modeling this way, never add more detail than you need. If you make unnecessary divisions at the early stages of your modeling, it will be harder for you to add bevel edges. And that's something we're going to go over later in another lesson. Anyway, another thing I wanted to show with the loop selection is that you can change the direction of it by pressing it twice. In surface selection mode, see, it's a toggle. And I can press Alt-B to convert that to edge selection. Now look, I can split that, but look what happens. It's splitting each polygon between two loops. And of course it does what I asked, but now I have these n-gons here. And like we learned in the last video, n-gons are bad, but actually not always, at least not in the early stages of modeling. Many times we can leave n-gons and clean them up later, or in some cases let Hexagon clean them up for us. Anyway, I can select these outer edges and press U to select between. And now I can split that. I can make the canopy of the jet by shaping it like this. And that's one way to do it, but I'm going to hit undo several times to get back to what I had before. Let's say I actually want to make the canopy separately from the body. And well, we just do that. But before I do that, let's look at inverting a selection. You can select these two polygons and press Alt-I. And that will invert the selection. And that's handy if you want to delete the body and leave only the shape. You know, I could press Command X. Anyway, let's undo that. Instead, let's do it this way. I can select just the part I want and press Command X, and that cuts the object out, but we can press Command V to place it back in the scene. And look over here in the scene tree, we see that it's a completely separate object, and I can move it away now as a separate object from the body. Now we can connect it back together by choosing both objects and pressing Command Shift C. Okay, let's make a quick extract around the edge of this using Shift A. And what you see, this gives you this arrow along the edge. What it's doing is waiting for you to drag that line towards the center, like this. Okay, now I can take these lines and move it, but when I do that with the manipulators, it moves absolutely in that direction, bending my shape. I'll undo that. In this case, a better way to do this is to use the slide edge. So I'll select these and press J, and then move it. What that does is slide the line along the normals of the shape. That means it's looking at the angle of the polygon and sliding along that angle instead of in the absolute x direction. That's great because it keeps our shape while we shift the geometry. Okay, last I'll show you this nice trick to connect these two shapes back together visually. First, let's shape the canopy a little bit more. I'll select these two opposite lines and then move it down a bit. And then we're going to select the lines on both the canopy and the body all the way around. And when that's done, we'll bridge them. Okay, now press Shift B to bridge. And what that does is create polygons between these shapes, connecting them. Alright, now I could have made this canopy using the Extrude tools, but what I wanted to do was demonstrate these other methods here first, because this course set of modeling selections will be useful things to know when we start learning about box modeling. Okay, so now I want to talk about something else. So this is what you would call a low poly model, and that is a model made with limited vertices, usually made for the purposes of having a game asset. The less vertices there are, the faster the game will run, and it takes up less memory too. But also, this is how you would do your blocking. Blocking is a method of creating references for blueprint drawings. And here, we quickly modeled our basic shape, and now that we have that, we can capture the front, top, and rear and bottom views. We can then take this to a drawing application and prepare a blueprint based on these proportions. That will let us plan, draw in the details, and make design decisions without having to waste time on modeling parts we may not use. And later in another video, we'll use this blueprint as a reference guide in Hexagon to help us model objects in greater detail. Okay, so that was a lot to go over. To speed things up, what I did was complete the model, and that's what you see here. Now, I was going to end the video here, but after I finished my jet design, I found there were a few more things that I should go over. The additional tools to quickly cover are adding a cylinder object, quick extrude, bevel, duplicating objects, mirror, filling holes, and capping them, the scene tree and grouping, and then I'll show how I colored the jet. So let's go over that part by part. First, let's have a look at making the jet engines. The engine was started with a cylinder primitive, so we'll start by pressing Alt-2 for making a cylinder. Click once. Now let's watch here to see what's happening in the lower corner. As I rotate around a bit, the gray box indicates the currently active plane. This isn't a big problem, but the cylinder wants to draw in an up or down direction. We want to change that. I can pivot the view to the Y plane and then click this to activate it. It's now yellow, showing it's active. And now our cylinder will draw in the direction I want. All we need to do is orient the view in that direction. Okay, if we look here, it's splitting into 8 sections. I want to lower that to just 4. And before I confirm, I'll hover over these openings and click on them, and that closes the holes. I can press again to reopen one, but additionally, this button here closes all the openings. However, if I click on that, it accepts the shape, and then all of my options disappear. That's what I wanted in this case, so we're fine. I'll move it here so we can see it better. I'll now loop select this slice in front, pressing Alt-E, and move it forward. And I continue to do that to make the shape of the engine, scaling the very front to shape the curve. And I shape the back the same way. Now I want to make the openings in the front and back. I'll pivot back to the front here, and I'll loop select the front edge and press Shift A to extract around, carefully moving my mouse towards the center. and then I press to set it. I switch to surface mode and select this part here. Now what we want to do is use this thing called Extrude. Extrude allows us to build up a shape and instantly add additional polygons in the process. We want to use fast extrude, and there's a button we can press for that, but there's a faster way, and that is to hold the command key down. See, when you have a surface or edge selected and hold the command key down, then you get this modification to the handles. But with the command key held down, press and drag the arrow. As we do that, the face is extruding, adding more polygons. There, we just made our first fast extrusion. Now let go of the command key, and with the face still selected, I can drag this extruded face inward, dragging the red arrow, and that makes our hole. And I can press T for transparency so we can see through it. Here I don't want to go all the way through, just about midway. And quickly now I can do the same for the back of the engine. I'll loop select, Shift A, extract along the edge, select the surface, hold command, extrude, and there we have it. Okay, rotate back to the front of the engine. There's just a minor detail left, the rounding of the edges in the front, and that's done with the bevel. So let's do that. I'll select these two lines and loop, and now I press B to bevel. It looks like nothing is happening, but press and drag on one of the edges, any edge, and you'll start to see these blue lines that indicate where your new edges will split. And so I do that and set, and then it makes the bevel. Okay, good. Let's now duplicate the engine. I'll press Escape twice to unselect this, and then select it. Now, in full object mode, you can quickly duplicate an object by pressing and holding the command key down while you drag and move it to a new location. And that's how you can quickly duplicate objects. And placing it was easy. I just move it to the same division mark that appears on both sides. You can see when I switch to wired shaded view, that's how I aligned these duplicated missiles. There are several ways of handling accurate placement, and we'll explore that more in the future, but for now you can just roughly eye it. Okay, moving on, let's talk about grouping. While we're looking at the jet's missiles, you can see when I select it, it's a group of pieces. And if you look at the scene tree here, you can see the group, and if I click on this arrow, I can see the different pieces inside the group. And honestly, the scene tree in Hexagon isn't the best. It's more fidgety than what you are used to with other applications that have a similar interface. But really the only thing we use it for is locking objects, toggling their visibility, and naming objects. Anyway, I'll press Command-Shift-G to ungroup this object. And with it ungrouped, I can see each part is separated. I can reselect these objects, pressing Shift to select multiple objects, and look, with them all selected, I can scale them proportionately as if they are grouped. And that's good, but I'll press Command-G to group them. It's grouped. And now I can scale them without selecting each piece. And generally, this is why we group objects, for convenience. When it comes to finalizing our model, grouping objects will become more of a hindrance. And I'll show at another time that there's a better way of managing and grouping and naming your objects for export. Anyway, I'll select the duplicated engines and press H. H hides the objects. If you look in the scene tree, the eye is closed, meaning it's not visible in the scene. Pressing H to hide is the same as pressing the eye here. Okay, so now we have some more space to do some more work. Let's look at how I made the missile. So obviously, to make this missile, I started with a cylinder primitive. So let's do that. Press Alt-2 and set it. And this time I'm not going to close the holes. I'll leave those open. And this time I'll rotate it into place. As I rotate, I can hold the Shift key, and that will snap to 45 and 90 degree angles. And I made too many lines, but no problem. I'll loop select, and press delete and choose strays only. So what about the point of the missile? How is that done? Let's have a look. But first, if you ever want to fill the opening like this, you can use the Close Holes tool. I also call it the Fill tool. So press Shift F, and when we do that, we see this familiar interface where we can choose which holes to fill. Then I press Accept or press Return to validate that. And that works on almost any opening. I'll show you. Here, I can make a quick grid shape pressing Alt 5, set the initial size, then draw out the grid, and then I can select these and make a hole, delete these polygons, and I can fill the opening with the Close Hole tool, Shift F. And the important thing to note here is that yes, it fills the shape with the polygon, but typically it's going to create a n-gon, and I'll need to remedy that by reconnecting vertices, like this. And by the way, I'm pressing Shift X to use the Connect tool. Anyway, back to making the point of the missile. Now you see our shape is filled with an n-gon. To make the point, we divide the shape by selecting the surface and pressing Shift K. This is known as capping a hole. It divided our n-gon into many polygons, each with 3 sides. Now I can select the center point here and drag it out to shape the front of the missile. And now that I have the basic shape, I can divide this a bit. But look, when I try to ring this, it doesn't work. Why? This kind of shape creates a point that is known as a pole. As you model more complex models, you'll need to manage the placement of these poles. In best practice, you want to have poles only in places where it makes sense. In this case, it makes total sense. We'll need to ring this shape a different way. I'll simply paint select all the lines, like this. And now I can divide it by pressing Shift X. Okay, now between here there is no pole, so I can make a quick ring selection and cut here. Then I can loop select it, and then scale it to start to round the shape of the missile. In regards to modeling, there's one last thing I want to show, and that's the symmetry tool, or I call it the mirror tool. And you can use that to make a flipped duplicate of one object or a group of objects. With this wing at the bottom and top, I duplicated them like I did the engine and missile, but it's on an angle and I want the angle to be reflected accurately on the opposite side. So let's select it and then press Command Shift Alt N. It shows me a cubic cage around the object, and when I hover over it like this, I can choose this side, and when I do, it makes a duplicate flipped. I can then drag that shape to the opposite side. We'll use this tool more extensively with something called cloning on more advanced models where accurate symmetry is important. Okay, so now I want to talk about how I colored the different surfaces. First, I'll start with an uncolored version of the jet. Coloring objects with basic colors is super simple in Hexagon. First, I'll set the color of the overall object, which is blue. In full object mode, I press Command A to select all. Then here, in the Materials palette, I press the New button to create a new material. I'll select it, and when I do, it shows me the name of the color that it has applied to it. For now, we can ignore all of these attributes seen below the color. I'll type here and name it blue. And then change the color to blue by selecting it like this. And as I do that, you can see the color of the objects changing. And generally, that's how you set the color. You select the object and create a material for it, or you select it and select the color and choose to set it. Okay, so let's make the missiles a different color. I'll select those and choose New to make a new material. Alright, I'll select that material and name it yellow and choose a yellow color. That's good. Okay, now that I have all the color materials here, this acts like a library of colors to use. I can apply them to different objects and surfaces. I'll select these wings and choose the yellow, and then with this pop-out menu, set it as the color. Now I'll select the surfaces of my canopy and choose to set it as yellow. But wait, the entire object is colored yellow. Why? That's because the canopy is part of the body. We would need to separate the canopy from the body to color it, or use something called shading domains to color it. So really, I want the canopy to remain part of the body, so I'll go with the shading domains method. I'll undo that. And with the canopy selected, in the shading domain palette, I choose the new button here. That created a shading domain, and it also created a new material at the same time. If I click off the surface, I can see the canopy has a lighter color. When Hexagon creates new materials for you, it gives it a random light color so you can see the different domains shaded differently. I want to make this yellow though, so I select the domain here and choose Change Material. And I can now select from my material library the yellow color. I can do the same for the rest of the surfaces, changing the colors. Each time I create a new domain, it creates a new material, but we can delete those once we have finished setting up and changing the materials we want. And I think that's everything you need to know to make some low poly models in Hexagon. We'll dive deeper into more advanced modeling methods in the next video. If you have a question for me, leave a comment below. In the meantime, have fun and make something cool. Thanks for watching.